Curry says, he has this concept of the man not. It is exactly the idea that Black men in mostly US contexts are feminized according to white men.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, they, according to racist ideas, racist thinking, they are seen as threats to white men, white women, and so on. And they are at the same time seen as patriarchal in gender studies because they are men. So in that sense, they kind of occupy this position of the man not. So they are not men because they are feminized, but then they are at the same time seen as patriarchal. So there is a big tension there.
Down the rabbit hole, research rabbit holes.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Research Rabbit Holes. My guest today is Dr. Tuula Kolehmainen, who is an affiliate researcher at the John Morton Center for North American Studies at the University of Turku. Welcome, Tuula.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so before we start, I always explain how I met my current guest. And Tuula and I recently met at the Maple Leaf and Eagle conference at the University of Helsinki. And there was a panel in which you spoke, and you spoke about stand-up comedy. And I saw that, I was like, wow, this is such a cool topic. I really want to listen to it. And so I went there and I saw your presentation. And I remember you were wearing this leopard print shirt and you were so self-confident and cool. And I was like, wow, I need this woman on my podcast. And now you're here. I'm so happy.
Thank you so much for the kind words. I was so excited and nervous about the presentation. So I'm very happy that the leopard shirt did its part.
Yeah, it was an awesome presentation. We're going to talk about stand-up comedy later, but our main topic today is going to be your dissertation, which you also turned into a book. Congrats on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so the dissertation is called Like Men They Stood, Black Male Vulnerability as Resistance to Stereotypes in Fiction Written by African American Women. So the first question I wanted to ask you, Tuula, is could you briefly describe what your dissertation project was about?
Yes. So the dissertation, and thus the book as well, is about representations of Black male vulnerability in fiction written by African American women, as the title conveniently says. So I'm looking at 4 authors that have received, many of them have received negative feedback on their representations of Black men in their fiction, and they are Black feminist authors, or categorized as such. And I wanted to see how those allegedly stereotypical representations of Black men actually work there. And I found this topic or theme of Black male vulnerability in the novels and short pieces of short fiction. So this is what I'm doing, and seeing how those representations actually deconstruct and resist those very same stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come up with this topic? How did you get the idea to focus on this?
Yeah, it was actually when I was doing my master's. It was a long time ago. So I did my master's about Toni Morrison's fiction. And then I noticed, when I was not focusing on male characters at all, but I did notice that, there are these very interesting male characters. They are usually not the center of the stories, because the books and short stories are usually about Black women and their stories and amplifying their voices. So, but I noticed that there are interesting male characters as well. And then I put in the conclusions, like, this would be a very interesting topic to look at. And then I did that in my PhD.
So your master's was focused on the female characters in these novels?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. What I found really interesting about your dissertation was the title, because Like Men They Stood is a quote from one of the novels you analyzed. Why did you choose this title and this quote?
Yeah, actually, the quote in the title, Like Men They Stood, it's from Morrison's novel Home, which I don't analyze in my dissertation. I just mentioned it in the introduction and conclusion, but the quote I picked because it's like I don't know if you have read the novel Home, but it's like this horrible scene where the male protagonist and his sister, they see a fight between two men, father and son, and they are actually forced to take part in that fight. And the fight only ends when one of them dies. So that's a very Morrison-like horrible scene, and the children see that, and they were so small that Frank, the protagonist, couldn't remember whether they were men or horses, and he always remembers that they were horses because the horses stood like men. They looked like men, but he thought they were horses. So, and then by the end of the novel, he remembers that they were actually men, and then the narrator explains, or I can't remember anymore, but it is explained to the reader that actually what happened there and what they saw. So this is what I wanted to kind of capture in my book, that what we see is not what we can see, like caricatures and people looking like something, and it actually might be more kind of nuanced, and there might be more to that. And also that, like men, the phrase "like men they stood" also kind of echoes those dehumanizing stereotypes that I'm talking about in the book, like animalistic and so on, and not men, not human beings, and so on. And also the "like men they stood," that they are like the idea that Black men would all be alike, as the stereotypes would like us to see them, for example. So it captures many of the themes in my book.
So what would be some of the stereotypes that are usually represented in these novels?
Yeah, I chose 4 kind of categories, kind of uniform stereotypes, which they are not. They are overlapping and changing over time and so on. But I wanted to have some kind of categories to focus on something in each chapter, and I tried to do that. So I took what I call the perpetual boy. It's like this infantilizing stereotypes that Black men are not seen as men, but boys and so on. This is a very, very old racist idea. And the other one is this, what I call the bad Black man. So it's Albert, as I noticed that you perhaps have read The Color
Yeah, I
Purple.
have.
So
It was actually a topic in my final master's exam.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, that's so cool. So the idea of the bad Black man, like this, is that also overlapping with the badness of men in the South and so on. So this is something that I also looked at, the violent man in literature and television, and also in racist thinking. And then I chose the third one, the primitive beast. Yeah, so this kind of savage picture of the Black man. And then the Black macho, which is somehow quite self-explanatory, but they do overlap, as you may notice, that they have similar characteristics as well. But those are ones that I chose, but of course there are others as well.
Now, you already said that the quote that is in your dissertation's title, that the novel where you took this from was not actually part of your corpus that you did research on. Why did you choose to exclude this novel? Or, well, maybe let's voice the question the other way around. How did you decide which novels you wanted to include in your research?
Yeah, I only chose one novel from Toni Morrison to start with. I started with Morrison because I knew her best at the time when I started my PhD project. So I wanted to choose Tar Baby. I had also analyzed it in my master's, which also was one of the reasons why I got interested in this topic in the first place. So and then I have The Color Purple. Those were published almost at the same time, 1981 and 82. So when I was born. So so then I chose two short stories from Toni K. Bambara. They were from the 70s, and then two novels, The Women of Brewster Place and The Men of Brewster Place from Gloria Naylor, which are from also 82 and 98, if I remember correctly. So how I picked those were that I was looking for the kind of the stereotypical looking male characters in the novels of African American men. So women, sorry. So I'm not, because in my dissertation, I'm not saying that this is what all African American women do in their books, but this is something that I actually search for books that have these kinds of male characters. Other books do too, but I also wanted to focus on just 4 authors and one book or short story collection, or one story per author. And also in these books, like the male characters, more, I'm not going to say it's explicit, but perhaps more explicitly suffer from different kinds of oppression according to different kinds of social stratification.
Okay. Was it difficult for you to decide which novels you wanted to include and which ones you wouldn't? Because I always think it's kind of hard to decide on a specific corpus, also for my own dissertation project.
It was a long time ago, but I remember that I postponed my application to PhD studies because I had a hard time choosing. So I was reading more books, and that for sure was very educational for me, because I was reading all these good books. But it kind of postponed my project. So I will answer yes.
I relate to that a lot.
Yeah.
So since it's focused on Black male vulnerability, how do you define this concept in the novels you analyze, but also maybe in real life? What is Black male vulnerability?
So this is something that I learned from a book by Tommy J. Curry. So I started my PhD project in 2014. And I only was looking at the stereotypes there, and one of my themes and topics in that stage was vulnerability. And then this book by Curry, it was published in 2017. So I had already worked like this wasn't my day job at the moment, but I had worked for a little while on my project already and selected the works and so on. And then I saw this book, and I bought it, and then I started reading it, and I was amazed that this is the thing that I'm seeing in these books. So the idea of Black male vulnerability actually gave me this theoretical framework in addition to intersectionality theory, and kind of explained to me what I had seen and couldn't put into words very well yet in that moment. So what Curry says is that Black male vulnerability, he has this concept of the man not. It is exactly the idea that Black men and this is mostly US context. So Black men are feminized according to white men. And at the same time, they are seen, according to racist ideas, racist thinking, they are seen as threats to white men, white women, and so on. And like this idea that they should be eliminated. And they are at the same time seen as patriarchal in gender studies because they are men. So in that sense, they kind of occupy this position of the man not. So they are not men because they are feminized, but then they are at the same time seen as patriarchal. So there is a big tension there. So this is, and it also has to do with the struggling, their real life struggle in the United States also could be analyzed more broadly and is analyzed more broadly as well. And also Curry says that in the United States, people are very used to the idea that Black men die. And this is very, very historical, and also is seen in literature, like referred to as something that was like men they stood. So so all these ideas have to do. What I analyze is that their interpersonal vulnerabilities, societal, having to do with race, gender, class, ability, and sexuality, and so on. So they are the Black male vulnerability in my view is constructed at the intersections of all kinds of social stratification.
I just had to think of the last episode I recorded for this podcast where we talked about the American prison system and the disproportionate representation of Black men in prisons, because I think it's like 13% of the American population who are Black, but in prisons it's like over 30% of all prisoners. And there's this book that's called The New Jim Crow, which kind of argues that the war on drugs is something like a racialized social control instrument. Yeah, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that's true. And there are so many other examples as well. So I think this is a very, very important topic. But I need to, at this, I should have said it in the beginning of this episode. But these are two European white women talking about this issue here. So also I think that this is a very important topic. At the same time, I can only kind of give an outsider view of that as a Finnish white woman who was born in 1982 when these novels, most of these novels were written. So, yeah.
Right. Thanks so much for mentioning that. I feel like when you hear this argument that Black men are at the same time portrayed as this patriarchal, often violent stereotype, but at the same time feminized in comparison to white men, this doesn't seem to match. So how do we make sense of that?
That's the point. That's actually the point. And I, in my project that I would like to work on in the future, also continues my effort to make sense of that. So that's exactly the main question. But stereotypes are very persisting, historical. They change in different contexts, and they are, even though they are simplistic, they can exist at the same time. They are often contradictory. So, and also often stereotyping from the person's view who is doing the stereotyping. It's about both fear and desire. So those are also very contradicting feelings. So this is a very, in my view, very, very complex thing. And I can't make like a crystal clear sense of it. And I don't know if it's possible, but it's certainly, Black men are put in the States, at least, in that position that is actually the core of Black male vulnerability.
It kind of reminds me of this stereotype of people saying things like, the foreigners are taking our jobs, but then at the same time saying, oh, the foreigners are too lazy to work, so they get money from the state. And then it's like, what are they doing? Like, make up your mind. What is it?
Yes, that's a very, very good example. It's very similar. And also it does show that they are not actually based on reality.
So you already mentioned intersectionality, and actually this semester I'm teaching a class for bachelor students where we also talked about this topic and about Kimberly Cranshaw's work on it. So Kimberly Cranshaw, like in a nutshell, she basically writes about the experiences of Black women, and she cites a book title, which is I think it's all blacks are men and all women are white, which basically means that black men kind of decide what the limits of racist discrimination are, and white women decide what the limits of gender discrimination are. And black women have they are discriminated by both, and at the same time, it would be too simple to say, okay, it's both of these categories that affect black women's life because they're double suppressed. So the idea that Crenshaw has is that you need to look at black women's experiences separately from that and acknowledge that they have a different experience and that it's maybe not in the limits that are defined by like previous experiences, previous scholarly works. And I wanted to ask you, how does intersectionality relate to black men's experiences?
It's true that black feminist thought is something that was kind of built on the disappointments on on racism in the women's movement, and then misogyny in the black movement. So
yes,
this is how black feminism came to place, even though there have been black feminist thinkers even before that. And I also not only list them, but talk about them as well in my book. So, but intersectionality theory, even though, it was first and foremost created to talk about this particular issue. But even, I think, in the 90s or something like that, Patricia Hill Collins, for example, who is also this very famous black feminist thinker, said that intersectionality can be used to explain or analyze other kinds of identities as well, because it's in my opinion, it's a great tool. It's a great lens through which and it is a lens as Crenshaw meant it to kind of see how different kinds of social stratification kind of shape your experience. So in that sense, they can be, the theory can be used and has been used to analyze other kinds of identities as well. In this case, for example, if we think about Bambara's male characters who are children, they have some kinds of disabilities which are not explained very, very fully. And if I take Manny, for example, one of the characters, he goes to, he's probably autistic or something like that, but there's no diagnosis, and I'm not someone who will make any diagnosis, but it looks a little bit like autism. And he doesn't speak a lot, and he doesn't pay attention to his surroundings a lot, or doesn't interact. And he goes on to the basketball court at night, and there's also the small female narrator by his side. And the female narrator talks back on the police officers, and Manny doesn't really. And he is taken away by the police, and the female, also in a very vulnerable position, is left alone on the courtyard at night. So this is something that is very gender specific to Black men. Like it also has to do with gender. So gender, if you are male, it doesn't always mean that you're patriarchal, and doesn't always give you power in all contexts in the world. So this is, I think, what intersectionality kind of helps us to see, that other things also than just race affect this person on this, in this particular context, because the female narrator is also Black, but she's also very in a vulnerable position, but only Manny is taken away, and I don't know what happens to him. The narrator doesn't know what happened to him afterwards.
That's so sad.
Yeah, but the narrator, the stories are also very funny. So she says that he was taken perhaps to a place for people who lose their marbles. So so that's also sad, but also a little bit funny. So that's Bambara.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's stay with that story for a moment, because I found it interesting how you described that Black male vulnerability in this story is kind of contrasted with this sassy, strong female character.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a quite common stereotype for Black women in films, literature, everywhere, basically. And so I was kind of wondering if male vulnerability is opposed to this female strength, isn't that, on the other hand, problematic for the depiction of Black women?
Absolutely. And I think that I mentioned this stereotype of the strong Black woman in my book as well, and this scholar Trudia Harris has written a whole book about that stereotype, and it's very interesting. So I think that what Bambara does in those stories is that she kind of intentionally juxtaposes this very, very vulnerable boy and then this very, very kind of strong and sassy female narrator who has the power to actually tell the story as well. And they threaten with others with violence, and also they kind of employ behavioral patterns that are stereotypically very masculine. So she kind of very explicitly juxtaposes these two, in my opinion, not to juxtapose them or reinforce them, but actually play with them to show how we sometimes perceive Black masculine, Black feminine behavior, how it should be, because she did not believe in that kind of stuff at all. So I really like this. If you ever look at Bambara more closely, there's this essay that she wrote, I can't remember when, but it was called On the Issue of Roles. And she was saying that I'm not arguing the denial of manhood or womanhood, but rather a shifting of priorities, a call for selfhood, Blackhood. So she was actually calling for unity and the liberation for the whole community, and kind of, but she was doing it through those juxtapositions. Yeah.
Okay. So it was
and
more
showing
like
that those both are problematic for people.
Okay, so it was more a matter of bringing attention to these stereotypes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In my, of course, I don't know what she wanted to do, but this is my guess.
It kind of reminded me of a film that I recently watched, which is called Anatomy of a Fall. Maybe you know it.
Oh, wow, I don't.
Because the big topic of this film is mental load and reciprocity in men-women relationships.
Yeah.
And the film kind of addresses that by reversing stereotypes. You've got a woman who's the breadwinner and who kind of neglects all the housework. And then you've got a man who's not a stay-at-home dad, but he does most of the housework, homeschools their kid and everything. And so the idea was like bringing attention to the topic of mental load by kind of reversing the roles like that.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. I want to see that. So the thing is that often readers and critics have seen some of these characters as kind of that they are created to reinforce or kind of say that all Black men are violent, for example. But they are, I think, kind of showing them the stereotypes very explicitly so that you can see how they work, as you just said. But I don't think that people always see that, and then they get mad.
There was also such a big issue with that film because I read some reviews of it and I looked up comments on social media, and I feel like so many people didn't actually get it.
Okay, that's interesting because I was going to say that we have talked about these things so long that perhaps now they can see those. No.
It's still a great film, though. I recommend it to everybody.
Wow. I have to see it on my vacation.
Yeah, please do. I also found it really interesting that in your dissertation, you wrote that Black male vulnerability is often a taboo topic. So why is that the case? Why don't more people talk about it, address it, discuss it?
Yeah, that's the question. Curry also talked about this, and this is, in his opinion, his argument is that a part of Black male vulnerability is the silence in academia, for example, about these issues. I'm not saying probably that there is a complete silence. But I have a few things that come to my mind, like, for example, it's a very sensitive issue. If we talk about, one of my articles after my book about Black male vulnerability in literature is going to be published any day now.
Oh,
so
nice.
Yeah, so I'm looking at Gail Jones. It's another African American author from the book is from the 70s. So similar topics, but there is a lot of, like, if we talk about the sexual victimization of Black men and boys, for example, which I'm talking about in that article, and I didn't talk about that much or at all in my book. So to begin with, it's a very sensitive issue. So it's understandable that many people perhaps don't want to talk about it. And then in some cases, it can be that talking about male victims of violence and sexual violence, it undermines women's experiences. So I do understand that, but then I don't understand that this would mean that we can't talk about this at all, because it's a different issue. And when there is this International Women's Day, when people are asking, like, what about men? When are you going to talk about men? I'm saying that, yes, I'm talking about it in my work every day, but today is Women's Day.
Right.
So people do talk about this, but then I understand, because sometimes when you talk about women's issues, someone comes to ask, what about men? Men are also victims of violence. Like, yeah, but we're not talking about that now. So this is something that people might be a little bit wary of, having these kinds of discussions. And it also has to do with homophobia, perhaps, because being a victim of sexual violence, it is stereotypically a women's issue. It's perhaps it's more of a women's issue. I haven't seen any like exhaustive data of this, but I think so. But then the perpetrators of sexual violence towards men can also be other men, and often are. So this is also a very, very sensitive issue. And if we think about the stereotypical patriarchal masculinity, you can't be a victim. So there's so many layers why this can be something that people don't want to discuss. Yeah.
Something that really struck me when I read your dissertation, by the way, it's really well written. I enjoyed reading it.
Oh, wow. Thank you to my copy editor and all my colleagues who have made drafts.
And something that really struck me was how current many of the stereotypes you describe still are, because the novels you analyze, they're like 20, 25. Some of them are more than 25 years old. And one example that I thought of was from this novel, The Men of Brewster Place, because you describe a character called Eugene, who's a closeted gay Black man who feels the need to kind of put on, you call it a strong Black man mask, to not be feminized, to not be confronted with these stereotypes. And I immediately had to think of this film Moonlight, which won the Oscar not too many years ago, because it's so similar, because you also have a closeted gay Black man who then becomes this like tough guy who's like associated with some form of organized crime as well. And it's all just because he can't be who he actually is, because he can't let people know that he's a gay man, because there is so much shame attached to it in a way. And so I kind of wondered, if these stereotypes were present so many years ago and not that much has changed, is there any way that we're headed in the right direction? Will these stereotypes still be prevalent in 10, 20 years? Or is there any way to maybe not overcome it, but to make things better in a way?
Wish I knew. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think we are going to overcome them very soon. It looks like of course, we are going in many ways to the right direction, but as you can see in the US, we're also going very fast to the wrong direction as well.
Of
So
course.
yeah, so I these are so historical, so persistent, and when you read the history books about how kind of black and white have been historically seen as like black is the night and death, and white is life and light, and so on. So all of these kind of juxtapositions in that sense as well, and they are such long-standing, persistent racist images. So I would like to say that yes, people won't see color in the near future, but I don't think so.
Hmm. Again, reminds me of the class I'm teaching right now because we talked about Edward Said's Orientalism, which
Mm,
is a book from 1978, so it's almost 50 years old at this
yeah,
point, but the stereotypes are still very much prevalent, and it kind of reads like it was published yesterday, which is super
yeah,
depressing.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. It's very depressing. Yeah.
Hmm. I feel like, on the other hand, at least in some cases, people are becoming more aware of stereotyping. Because one thing I had to think of is the movie The Blind Side. This
I
won
haven't
the
seen that.
Oscar when it came out, and
Mm,
it kind of has. So it's sort of a real life story, but I mean they obviously changed parts of it for like dramatic purposes. Which it's about a black boy who gets adopted by a white family, and he later becomes this American football superstar. And I think Sandra Bullock won the Oscar for it as like best actress in a leading role. She plays the adoptive mom.
hmm
And so it was very positively received when it came out in like 2009-ish, I think.
hmm
And now people are becoming much more critical of this movie because it has like the white savior
Yeah.
trope. And apparently, I think in real life, so the guy who was portrayed in the movie, Michael Oher, who later became a American football star, he also spoke out about this movie, and he was like, actually, my relationship with my adoptive family is not that great. And so people are like, okay, it's kind of romanticizing this relationship with the adoptive family a lot. So I feel like maybe there is, at least in specific areas, at specific points, there is increased awareness. Um, on the other hand, for example, the stereotype you described of like black people being perceived as like more athletic, rhythmic, etc. I think this is still very present.
Yeah, some of the, like, not all stereotypes are negative or life-threatening per se. So I haven't really, in my work, I haven't really looked at those. What were you talking about before this?
The blind side and the white savior trope.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because this is something that I've seen in movies as well. Like The Help. It's a
Oh
book,
yeah.
but I haven't read the book. But I remember because I used to go to the movies and watch a lot of like Dear Project, watch a lot of movies about like African American, I don't know, life, culture, so on. So I went to see, or I watched the it was from 2011, so I wasn't, so I watched it at home, and I was so disappointed. There was this character, I think his name was Leroy, the husband of one of the female protagonists, the black man, and
Hmm.
they didn't, correct me if I'm wrong or if I remember incorrectly, but they didn't even show him. They only showed how those things that he threw on his wife were kind of going going through the room, and he was only this bad black man, like
Mm.
domestic violence. Of course, that happens, but if that's the only way you show a black male character in that movie, and it's only this domestically violent person who you don't
God, yeah.
you don't even show his face, So, and I immediately Googled, like, is this from a white person? Yes, it is. Okay, got
Oh
it.
God.
So, and yeah, so I was so disappointed. So it's quite new. It's only 15 years ago also.
Mm.
So yeah, but it's a book It's a book, of course, but books and movies can be very different, as you know. So yeah. And also the movie version of The Color Purple, as you might know, that it was directed by Steven Spielberg, or directed or produced. And then people, but this was like especially black men were demonstrating against it because because of the stereotypical portrayals of black men, because all the nuance, and not all, but many of the parts which I analyze in my book are not in the movie.
Really, I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, you should. It's quite a good movie, but then it doesn't show how Albert changes. It doesn't really show any kind of his human side. But Alice Walker was kind of somehow collaborating when the movie version was done, and she has accepted the movie version. So I'm not sure about that. But people were protesting, and people are still debating on The Color Purple. So it has left both the book and the movie.
I recently read that it's also been turned into a musical, and that kind of confused me, because I was like, how can a story in which such dark themes like domestic violence play a very important role, how can that be turned into a musical? But I haven't seen it, so I can't really judge.
Yeah, it must be an intense experience for the viewer. Yeah.
Yeah, staying with The Color Purple, because as I said, I had to, I decided to read it for my master's final oral exam. Were you always able to empathize with all the characters that you analyzed for your dissertation project? Because to be really honest, for me, it was hard to empathize with Albert. I was quite triggered by the topic of domestic violence. And so, I mean, yeah, at the end he gets this kind of redemption arc, but still it was hard for me to have empathy with his character. So did you ever find yourself struggling to have empathy during your research and writing process?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, when I read The Color Purple for the first time, I think that, like, I thought that the ending was kind of, it wasn't, I didn't really believe in his change, and it was kind of a naive or kind of fabricated or something like that. And I was like disappointed, like, no, why? Like, who believes that? And then I read it more times, and then I started noticing that, I think I wrote in my book at least that I felt like the kind of the implied author kind of had this empathetic relationship with Albert. And Celie also says at the end that she doesn't hate Albert because he loves Shag as she does. And then also that Shag used to love him. So there must be something good to the person as well. So that's kind of the Celie's point of view, but also the implied author kind of loved him in all his, like, he's not near perfect, but kind of this humanity that none of us are, and also like he's had some experiences in life that has made him like that, and then he has this will to make amends for his past deeds. But obviously, if we think about Celie's stepfather, no empathy there, and he's kind of, it's not even, because the novel doesn't really, the narrative doesn't give any space for empathy, because nothing is told about him that would kind of not justify but explain his deeds. He's just like a bad person, and this is someone I don't feel empathy for. And also, if we think about Eugene in the first novel, he was horrible, and he was just so selfish, a husband that acts like a toddler, and aggressive, and also that then the children die, and forces his wife to do an abortion, and so on. So it's like horrible. So, and in the other Proust Place novels, Eugene is explaining why he was that way, and in my opinion, is like, this is too much.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we look at other media apart from literature, for example, TV shows, film, I was kind of wondering if there's similar attempts at looking and analyzing and criticizing Black stereotypes, or if it's still mostly a literature-driven attempt. Because I kind of tried to think of positive examples, and I think the only one I could come up with that has positive Black representation was Black Panther, which everybody was talking about a couple of years ago. And then I kind of thought of, okay, where do we have Black representation in like popular things? And one thing I had to think of from my childhood was High School Musical. I loved High School Musical when I grew up. And there's the stereotypical Black best friend for both leading characters. And what really struck me was that none of them ever got to sing a song on their own. They were always just in like group numbers, and they're actually in a romantic relationship with each other, but they never got to do it. And like the two main characters got duets all the time, and it's just something you don't really think about as a kid. But later, I kind of realized it, and so I wanted to ask you, like, in the current media landscape, is there anything you would describe as maybe as efficient, or like is there anything, any film, any TV show that attempts to criticize Black stereotypes in the same way as the novels you analyzed are, or is it still mainly a literary thing?
That's a great question. I haven't, as I told you, I used to go to the movies to watch new films about the Black experience, to kind of have an idea of that, but I haven't really analyzed anything. But I was very impressed about Django Unchained, for example. So this could be, not in the same way at all, actually, but it was a very good movie that really kind of talked to those histories and stereotypes, but it's not similar. But yeah, I haven't really seen, but it can also be because I haven't really looked for those. In a sense, so but movies and like TV shows, certainly, as you said, that nowadays it's very difficult not to see them everywhere, like the somehow stereotypical portrayals of Black characters. Yeah, but I haven't analyzed them.
In your dissertation, you also described I'm going to call it burden of Black writers, especially Black women writers, to have to prove the stereotypes wrong in their writing. And again, I had to think of something. So I recently read a critique of Greta Gerwig's movies. So she directed, for example, the Barbie movie, Little Women, Lady Bird, and a critique was that she always only makes movies about skinny white women. And I found that really unfair, to be honest, because I thought, okay, you would never say something like that about a male director. And I feel like the reason why she got criticized for that is because we have so little mainstream success of women directors. Like usually at the Oscars every year, in the best director category, maybe you've got like one woman. And so they kind of have this burden of like having to be political, having to be feminist, having to represent everybody. And I feel like for Black women, it's probably even worse. And so I wanted to ask you, is it even possible if Black women writers just want to write a novel, like without anything inherently political in it? Or is that just something that they will always have to deal with, which is really unfair in my opinion?
Yeah, I also think that they shouldn't have to. And also, as African American literature is such a rich tradition of literary works. I haven't read all of the novels, or I'm only familiar with a very small portion of the canon even. So I'm not sure, and I have not read a lot of like very current books. But I remember that Toni Morrison had to always answer the question, like not always, but there was this an interview saying that like when are you gonna write about white people? And she was like, what? Like
That's a bizarre question.
yeah, that's a bizarre question, but that's like the position where they were at that moment, because of course she is immensely popular, a Nobel Prize laureate. So but also the fact is that Morrison did always write kind of politically, and these authors that I'm looking at, they all took part in the socio-political discussion about race and gender and class and so on. So this was something that they were English teachers, and they were like highly educated, and certainly were talking about political issues in their books. But then again, it doesn't take away from the fact that their books are also very, very extremely high value literary works of art.
Of course.
So, yeah, but about your question, can they do it? I don't know. We should probably ask them. But there is this, and also this history of African American literature. That's often it has been one of the things that African American literature do, is to kind of talk back to the stereotypes and kind of deconstruct them. But some people might think that that's the only thing that they do, but of course it's not. But there's also this tradition that they do this. Yes.
So which of the work that you analyzed did you actually like the most? Is there any that you specifically want to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I always recommend Tar Baby, because it's if we talk about Toni Morrison, people always, I've read Beloved and so on. And Tar Baby is not always people are not familiar with it, and there is not as much scholarly work on it, but it's always been my favorite Morrison book, because I have, of course, also read it more times than the others. But every time I read it, it kind of turns something upside down for me. Like it persuades me to think in a certain way, and then it tricks me, and it makes me kind of stuck on some preconceptions, and then kind of takes the rug under my how do you say that in English?
It is also a German proverb, but I don't know how to translate it to
English expressions now. So just like it keeps on tricking me. So I like it, because I think I'm intelligent and I know the novel, and then I read it. And, but no. And then I'm like, I see what you did there, and I didn't see at all. So
that's pretty cool. I mean, since we're both literary scholars, I feel like one thing that is maybe a slightly negative effect of studying literature is that it's difficult to really be surprised by a book. And I really like it when a book subverts my expectations, because very often you're like, okay, I've read something similar maybe 10 times and I kind of know how this is going to end. And so I'm always happy when I read a book where it's not like that.
Yeah. And Tar Baby is constructed in a way that you want to kind of read it in a Eurocentric way. At least I do, because I'm very used to, as a child I read European tales, and they are constructed in a certain way. So there's a hero, and then there's this woman, and so on, and then there might be even a happy ending to the story, and there is none of that. But Morrison has written it like as if there was, and that's the problem. And even the scholars that read it first, one of them said that this is a disappointment and a failure. They called it a failure, the novel. And it's like they didn't understand at all that you should kind of read it in a more Afrocentric way, thinking about the dilemma tale. And the name is Tar Baby, so that comes from old trickster tales that are kind of African American, coming from Africa with the slave ships and so on. So you have to know this whole tradition that the novel is speaking to.
Cool. Now I really want to read that one too.
Yay.
Nice. Okay, so let's move over to our second topic, which is stand-up comedy. And Tuula, I know that you also used to do stand-up comedy. So how did you start with that? And are you still doing it occasionally?
Yeah, I started that in 2013, and then I stopped doing that in 2020, and then I started again in 2025, and now I am doing some gigs. I had one on, what is the day? No, on Wednesday. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I'm doing a little bit of stand-up nowadays as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. What are the topics you talk about? Like academia or anything unrelated?
No, I'm not talking at all about academia. They say that for something to be funny for you, you should have some distance. So I don't feel I have any distance. It's not funny.
Okay.
So topics, yeah, I was gonna say what topics then. Mostly, I think in the past I talked about I'm a daughter of a single dad, and I talked about him and my goddaughters and just some like very everyday stuff, because I'm feeling that in my work in academia I get to talk about very complex things and very kind of intellectual things. So this is not something that I want to focus on in my comedy. So that kind of the fun part of life. Even though, of course, talking about complex issues is fun as well, but it's a different kind of fun.
So cool you're doing that though. Like I wish I could see it. Maybe someday when I'm gonna learn Finnish, I'm gonna come to one of your shows.
Yeah, there is material, very, very old, not so good clips on YouTube in Finnish, if you want to see it. I have my 4 minutes in fame in Finnish television as well, 7 years ago. So those clips, some of those clips are on YouTube as well. So.
Do you want me to link that in the episode? I can do that.
You can if anyone's interested, but it's in Finnish.
All right, cool. Now you've also started doing research on stand-up comedy, and one article you wrote that you shared with me was about male comedians performing abortion jokes. So can you maybe briefly describe how they make these jokes and like what are they talking about there?
Yeah, I was actually the way that I started why I started looking at these jokes in particular was I was going to a panel in a conference which was kind of a reproductive justice in popular media, and I was like, okay, I have looked at stand-up, so perhaps I can take a look at that. And it was 3 years ago after the Roe v. Wade was just overturned. So I was looking at stuff just before the law and just after that. So kind of what's happening there. And I checked Netflix and YouTube and this website Scraps from the Loft, where there are a lot of transcripts of stand-up comedy shows. And I looked for any topics on reproductive justice. And what I noticed is that when male stand-up comedians in the States talk about reproductive justice during that period of time, they talked about abortion. So that was my first what I found, and then I was super disappointed as a comedian, as a comedy viewer, that they were quite easily put into 3 categories of very simple, not very intelligent jokes. Like the first one was like those comedians talked about how they pay for the abortions. They are the payers of the abortion. So different versions of basically the same joke. Like, I love abortions. I paid for 2 last week. I
To
can't
kind of
remember.
say, hey, I'm having sex, just so you know.
Yes. And Mark Maron said that if you have, I don't know why men are not talking about this, because if you have any game at all, you have paid for at least 2 of those. So that's basically the same joke. So over and over, and these immensely popular, famous, rich comedians are making money with the same joke. I didn't like it. So that
Yeah.
was one of them. And then the other was like, I'm pro-choice, but there's also kind of that they say that I'm pro-choice, but then they say something that actually, no, you're not, or something like that. And then they reuse slogans like it's my body, my choice.
Uh-huh.
So was it Chappelle who said that uh, if they can kill the baby, at least I can abandon them. It's my money, my choice. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's my money, my choice. So it's also the payer. Like I'm paying for it. So, and I was like, like why? Like these people are making so much money. Obviously, they have other jokes as well. But then I saw also that which is the more interesting part, is that there were 2 comedians from which I found some material on abortions. Anthony Jeselnik, who is a very dark comedian, but and usually performs these one-liner kind of short jokes, which just set up punch, and so on. But this was a kind of a 15-minute story where he brings his friend to an abortion clinic to have an abortion, and that's kind of this was uh, more like ridiculing how self-centered he was, waiting for his friend, and like he was bored, and then he tried to say something funny and failed, and so on, and it was I really like to analyze that. I'm not going to do that here, but you can read if you're interested. And then there's this other comedian who is Steve Hofstetter. He's very active in social media, very pro-choice, and also a very kind of leftist activist comedian. Very interesting figure as well. So I also analyzed what he's doing with the abortion jokes.
What I found really interesting is that apart from this one comedian that you just named, most of them didn't actually take a stance in the debate, right? Like they made jokes about it, but most of them didn't say, for example, I'm pro-choice or like I'm pro-life or stuff like that. And so I was wondering if they don't take either side, why even make a joke about the topic at all?
What I have noticed sometimes, at least concerning some comedians, is that they want to provoke. So they take these sensitive issues and this kind of divisive issues and want to just say something about them, because it may, of course, create some laughter in some audiences, their fans, but it's also kind of an easy way to provoke as well, to have some kind of reaction from the audience, and then
Okay.
people start talking about it. I don't know, we would have to ask them, but this was my idea because I unfortunately had to watch Dave Chappelle's latest show on Netflix, and there was a lot of that I'm not sure if this is meant to be funny or just to provoke. So yeah.
Yeah. From the outside perspective, it kind of looks like the American comedy scene is growing more political. I just had to think of the cancellation of, was it Stephen Colbert's show, right? Do you think there is an increasing political division in American comedy? Are there also comedians that sympathize more with like the far right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. To begin with, think about the American comedy scene. So are we talking about the most paid, most famous comedians
Yeah.
in the States? Yeah. So It can be, because I think that stand-up comedy very well today reflects what's happening in society, and this is why it's also important to talk about or do research on stand-up comedy, because in a sense people are talking much more about politics in social media, for example. So then these comedians are also, they have they post their stuff on social media and take stand on in their shows and so on. And perhaps there are more right-leaning comedians as well. For example, Joe Rogan's
Oh,
anti-woke comedy club in
uh-huh.
Austin that has been there for like I think 4 years or
I didn't
something
know
like
he had a
that.
comedy club. That's all
Comedy
right.
Mothership. At least when it opened, it was categorized as an anti-woke comedy club, like a safe space to say whatever you want to without being cancelled and
Mm.
so on. So these perhaps, but I also think that in the States, I don't want to be too essentializing, but comedy has always been quite political, and also, but yeah, things are changing pretty fast in the society as well. So I'm trying
Mm.
not to say anything very definitive here.
Mm. Honestly, I would say that there is quite a large chunk of German comedy that's anti-woke. Like there is a lot of comedians
Hmm.
that, for example, mock veganism or feminist
Hmm.
topics. So it's definitely a thing here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I'm sad to hear that. Um,
Yeah, me too.
this is something, one of the things that I would like to also do research on in the future, kind of not the German comedy scene, but the kind of these, how they are talking about this kind of sensitive issues, like men talking about women's issues, or
Mm.
freedom of speech that I was talking about in the conference we met in, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found it really interesting that in your article, you quoted another article that said that in the American comedy scene, comedians are kind of like public intellectuals. Because, I mean, as I said, German comedies tends to be political as well, but nobody would call a comedian like a public intellectual here. So, was it always like that in the United States?
Um, this is, I can't say was this always like this in the United States, but I was thinking that like Kuntze and Champion that wrote the article, and they talk about, this is in the US context, the book. Um, I, I find it very intriguing that comedians could be seen as public, that they kind of, they function as public intellectuals. Like they have the microphone, they have a very powerful stance there. They talk to the masses, and then some people come to oppose them, and then they react to that, and they are, as we are now interviewed in podcasts talking about current issues and so on. So they kind of function as public intellectuals. So don't people do that in Germany?
Comedians mostly not, no.
Okay, yeah, interesting. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. I wouldn't say that um that in Finland either. So perhaps that is a very kind of a US specific thing, but I haven't really uh research that in so much detail. But I find it very intriguing, and even though as a stand-up comedian myself, I don't. I feel very, very distanced from the idea of being a public intellectual, but then again, as a scholar as well. So so I don't know how people would categorize each and every comedian. But I think if
Hmm.
you think about George Carlin, for example, the late comedian who was talking a lot about, I think, climate change, and also kind of also touched upon the idea of abortion and so on. So yeah, I could see them as public intellectuals in a sense, even though they don't have their doctorate.
Hmm. Okay.
Mm.
Coming back to the issue of reproductive rights, another article that you quoted kind of said that if you keep men completely outside of the discussion, as many of these comedians did, because as I said, they did not position themselves in the discussion, that it conveniently hides men's decisions, actions, and accountability. And on the one hand, I kind of agree with that. On the other hand, I thought, isn't it also important to stress that it's mostly women's voices who count in this debate, because it's women's bodies that are affected and not men's bodies, right?
Yeah, but I think those two things can kind of coexist. Like, it is true that people with wombs, I guess, are the ones that should be involved in decision making and should be heard when making decisions about these things and so on, and kind of share experiences and so on. But I like the idea that Joy made there, that but if we completely keep men out, also pro-choice men, which exist, as we keep them out, and at the same time, kind of all unwanted pregnancies also include men's decisions, actions, and accountability. So we don't want to, it's about responsibility. So we don't want to have that kind of world where all of a sudden it's a women's issue, in the sense that it is taken for granted that it's women's responsibility, the pregnancies are their responsibility, and the children are their responsibility, and men are completely outside. It's not our business. Like, no, it's like, and in the ideal world, if we could have respectful, open communication across all genders about these issues, that could build equality. But it's not an ideal world, obviously. But yeah, but my short answer is that I think those can coexist, those ideas.
You already said that the abortion jokes were kind of the hot topic like 3 years ago when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Is there any like divisive topic that's discussed in the American comedy scene right now?
Yeah, I think perhaps it's me, because I've looked at the issue a little bit closer, but I think that it's the freedom of speech that I was talking about in the conference. Like, it was funny when Dave Chappelle has been talking about like this cancel culture, and because people haven't liked his anti-trans material, and he feels like he's being canceled, even though he's saying that on Netflix. so this is one thing, and also at the same time that those things are happening, they are going to Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, to a comedy festival that is paid for by the Saudi government. So those kinds of things, and other comedians have like criticized those who have gone. But I don't know how divisive it is, because I was watching the roast of Kevin Hart. So there were people who went to Saudi, and then people who criticize them for going there. So I don't feel, because they are there sitting in the same, of course they are making a lot of money, so that's also an issue.
So we're slowly approaching the end of our episode, and I would like to do a little segment with you that I call This or That, where I give you two alternatives and you spontaneously tell me which one you prefer.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, cool. So, first one. Writing a paper or writing a monograph?
Paper.
Okay. Helsinki or Turku?
Helsinki.
Oh, why?
Should I? Oh, I should explain. Okay. I have lived in Helsinki for almost 21 years, and in Turku for 3 years. So I consider this my home. So my hometown. So even if it's not.
Okay. Going to a stand-up comedy show or to an ice hockey match?
Stand-up comedy. I do love hockey as well, but I seldom go. I just watch. I actually watch stand-up online as well. So.
Okay. Last one. Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon?
Oh, Lord, I say Fallon.
Okay. I would pick the same, I think.
Okay.
All right. Now, to conclude our episode, Tuula, I wanted to ask you, what are your plans for the future? Are you going to work a bit more on the stand-up comedy topic, or is there any other project for you that's coming up soon that you're interested in?
Yeah, as I said, that one of my literary papers is going to be published and in a few days, hopefully. And then there is also one co-written chapter in a book about intersectionality and reading and so on coming up soon. And then I have some papers that are like half written and so on in the drawer that I might be. So they are about my project where I look at how Black men talk about their vulnerabilities themselves, kind of their lived experiences of, like, because I looked at the representations in my book. Now I'm looking at like self-representations, because the people that I've chosen are stand-up comedians in the States. So how they are talking about, for example, Chappelle talks about how he was attacked, because he was attacked on stage, like physically attacked. That's a very,
oh my God.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. And he was attacked by this person with a knife on stage in Hollywood, if I remember correctly. So those things, and also the Oscars, like the famous slap at the Oscars, like that was also someone attacking you physically on stage, what that means and how they talk about it. So this is one article, and it's about a piece of a bigger one that I would like to get funded, like how they talk about their own vulnerabilities on stage. So this is what I want to do. And the other one is how male comedians talk about these sensitive issues in the States, and I would very much like to kind of see how that changes now that there is this person as president.
Wow, super interesting. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And I also wanted to ask you, where can our listeners follow your projects? Do you have a website or any like social media channel that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that the only fully professional social media I have is LinkedIn, and I'm not very active there, but I will certainly always publish there, post there when I have published something. But I do have an open Instagram account that if anyone wants to see stuff in Finnish and my daily life, you can welcome, because that's where I also put my stand-up and my research as well. So
cool.
So it's should I say it now, or should
please share the
I
handle.
link it to you? It's Tuula Kolehmainen official. It's the Instagram, and then I think on LinkedIn you can just find me with my name. Although there might be some people with the same name, but
I'm gonna link it.
You'll link it, yeah, good.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, this was actually my last question. Tuula, thank you so much for this amazing interview.
Much.
I enjoyed this so much, really.
Me too. Thank you.
Cool. And then thanks everybody for listening to this episode, and hopefully see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Down the rabbit hole, research rabbit holes.